Loving a narcissist feels like stepping into a beautiful dream that slowly turns into a maze you can't escape. At first, everything is dazzling: the affection, the attention, the way they make you feel like the center of the universe. But little by little, the shine fades. Their compliments sharpen into criticisms, their warmth cools into indifference, and their love becomes something you have to earn. You start questioning yourself, doubting your memory, apologizing for things that aren't your fault. The world gets quieter, smaller, lonelier. And the most painful part isn't the chaos they create, it's how quietly they convince you to abandon yourself. This is the hidden trauma of loving a narcissist, losing who you are without ever noticing the moment it happened. But recognizing that truth is the first step toward reclaiming your voice and your freedom. The erosion of identity in a relationship with a narcissist happens so slowly and subtly that most people don't realize it's occurring until they barely recognize themselves. It begins with small compromises that feel harmless, changing the way you dress because they make a comment, adjusting the tone of your voice to avoid irritating them, abandoning an opinion because they insist theirs is the only one that makes sense. These shifts seem like normal adjustments people make in a relationship, but with a narcissist, they are never balanced by reciprocity. You bend, they remain rigid. You adapt, they demand more. Over time, the space you occupy in your own life becomes smaller as their preferences, their moods, and their expectations fill every corner. A narcissist's sense of superiority means they believe they know what's best for you, even when it comes to your thoughts and emotions. If you express joy about something, they may dismiss it as trivial. If you share concern or sadness, they might tell you you're overreacting. Slowly, you learn to mute parts of yourself to avoid their judgment. You might stop sharing dreams, ideas, or creative impulses because they mock them or show no interest. You might stop celebrating your wins because they overshadow them or twist them into something about themselves. Each time you silence an emotion or hide a part of your personality, you lose a small piece of your identity. Their need for admiration can also make you responsible for upholding their self-image. You become the one who must reassure them, praise them, support them. Even when you're exhausted or hurting, being seen as valuable in their eyes becomes a full-time job. You start relying on their approval to feel grounded, not because you want to, but because their disapproval can be so cutting that avoiding it feels safer. When your sense of worth becomes tied to the emotional weather of someone who is never satisfied, your internal compass begins to malfunction. You stop asking yourself what you want or need because everything is measured through their reaction. Another part of identity erosion lies in how a narcissist often rewrites moments to maintain control. If they hurt your feelings, you're told you're being dramatic. If they break a promise, they insist they never made it. If you remember something differently, they say your memory is flawed. This constant rewriting of reality makes you doubt your instincts. You stop trusting your own perception and begin deferring to theirs, believing they see things more clearly. Over time, you lose faith in your judgment, making you less likely to stand up for yourself or question their behavior. Isolation intensifies this process. A narcissist may subtly discourage you from seeing friends or family, not always through direct commands, but through guilt, criticism, or manufactured drama. When your support system weakens, you lose the mirrors that reflect who you are outside the relationship. Friends who once reminded you of your strengths drift away because the narcissist consumes your time and emotional energy. Without those reminders, you increasingly define yourself through the relationship alone. The things that once grounded you, your interests, your hobbies, your social connections, fade as you pour everything into maintaining harmony with someone who never offers it in return. Over time, you may begin to feel like a muted version of who you once were. You may speak less, initiate less, and dream less. You may find yourself hesitating before expressing even harmless opinions, afraid of criticism or dismissal. You may notice that you pause before doing things you once enjoyed, wondering if they would approve. What once felt natural now feels risky. This internal hesitation is one of the clearest signs that your identity has been reshaped to accommodate someone else's dominance. What makes this erosion so painful is that it doesn't happen through force, but through emotional conditioning. You change because it feels necessary, because you're trying to protect the relationship, because you're hoping to regain the warmth the narcissist offered in the beginning. You adjust yourself again and again, believing that if you can just be a little more agreeable or a little less sensitive, things will return to how they once were. But the more you shrink, the more room they take up. The more you give, the less they value what you've given. The person you become is shaped not by mutual love, but by survival within the relationship's emotional landscape. The erosion of identity is one of the deepest wounds inflicted by narcissistic love, not because it's dramatic, but because it's quiet. It happens in the spaces between arguments, in the moments of self-doubt, in the choices you stop making for yourself. It's a slow unraveling of the self that leaves you wondering when you stop being the person you thought you were, and how much of that person you still have left. Emotional manipulation and gaslighting form the psychological core of narcissistic relationships, shaping the victim's reality through confusion, distortion, and subtle coercion. It often starts in small, almost unnoticeable ways. A narcissist may brush off your concerns with a laugh, minimize your feelings as overly dramatic, or insist that you misunderstood something they clearly said. In the moment, these incidents seem trivial. You shrug them off, thinking maybe you misheard or maybe they're having a stressful day. But over time, these small distortions accumulate, creating an atmosphere where your perceptions are constantly questioned and your emotions are repeatedly invalidated. A narcissist's emotional manipulation thrives in ambiguity. They rarely use direct commands or obvious cruelty at first. Instead, they push boundaries through implication, tone, or passive-aggressive behavior. If you confront them about something hurtful, they may shift the blame onto you, suggesting you're too sensitive or that you provoked them. They twist the narrative so subtly that you begin to wonder if you actually are the one who misinterpreted the situation. This erosion of trust in your own judgment is intentional, even if they don't consciously plan it. As long as you question yourself, you are easier to control. Gaslighting deepens when the narcissist begins altering the details of past events. They may deny making a promise, even when you remember it clearly. They may act as if a painful conversation never happened. They might insist you're imagining things they themselves said just days earlier. The more you protest, the more confident they become in their denial. They use your confusion as proof of your supposed instability. Eventually, you start second, guessing not just the event in question, but your overall ability to recall things accurately. This becomes fertile ground for manipulation as your dependence on their version of reality grows. Another form of emotional manipulation involves alternating between affection and withdrawal. A narcissist may praise you intensely one day, only to turn cold or irritated the next, often without explanation. These emotional whiplashes keep you constantly on edge, trying to figure out what you did to cause the shift. In truth, the shift rarely has anything to do with you. It's a tool to keep you uncertain, eager to win back their approval. That uncertainty becomes a psychological tether. When they finally show warmth again, it feels like relief, and you cling to it. This intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful conditioning mechanisms, making it extremely difficult to step away from the relationship. Manipulation also appears in the way narcissists weaponize your vulnerabilities. Early in the relationship, they may have encouraged you to share your fears, insecurities, or painful experiences. But once they sense your emotional weak points, they store them like ammunition. During arguments, stress, or moments when they feel challenged, they bring these vulnerabilities back to the surface, not to comfort you, but to destabilize you. They may say something that hits precisely where it hurts the most, leaving you feeling exposed and unbalanced. In these moments, they appear strong, controlled, and composed, while you feel fragile and overwhelmed, reinforcing the power imbalance they depend on. Narcissistic manipulation often includes a subtle pressure to suppress your emotions unless those emotions benefit them. If you're upset because of something they did, you're accused of overreacting. If you show anger, you're labeled unreasonable or difficult. If you express sadness, they may dismiss it or act for a moment like they care, only to turn the situation into an opportunity to highlight how much they endure by being with someone so emotional. Eventually, you internalize the belief that expressing your feelings is pointless or dangerous. You learn to bottle everything up, creating inner turmoil that deepens the psychological impact of the relationship. Another tactic involves placing you in situations where you feel responsible for their emotional state. They may imply that your actions determine whether they are happy, stressed, or upset. If they lash out, it's because you triggered them. If they're distant, it's because you failed to meet some unspoken expectation. This constant sense of responsibility wears away your emotional boundaries. You start watching yourself more closely, adjusting your behavior to prevent conflict, and taking on their moods as if they are your own. You lose the ability to separate their emotional chaos from your internal world. Over time, the cumulative effect of emotional manipulation and gaslighting is profound. You may begin to feel disconnected from your instincts, unable to trust your interpretations of even simple situations. You might avoid bringing up concerns out of fear of being dismissed or attacked. You may feel a constant low-level anxiety, aware that at any moment the emotional climate could change without warning. The narcissist's voice becomes louder in your head than your own, guiding your thoughts, shaping your reactions, and overshadowing your inner truth. The cycle of idealization and devaluation is one of the most disorienting and emotionally consuming aspects of loving a narcissist because it keeps you suspended between hope and devastation, connection and abandonment. It begins with idealization, a phase often described as intoxicating. This is when the narcissist places you on a pedestal so high that it almost feels spiritual. They may shower you with affection, admiration, and attention that feels overwhelming in its intensity. They make you feel chosen, special, almost extraordinary. Their gaze feels like warmth. Their words feel like affirmation. Their presence feels like purpose. It's a kind of emotional high that binds you deeply before you even have time to understand what's happening. In this phase, they mirror your dreams, interests, and values, convincing you that you've found someone who truly understands your heart. This illusion creates the emotional glue that will later hold you in place during the devaluation that inevitably follows. What makes this cycle so powerful is that the shift from idealization to devaluation is rarely abrupt. It's more like a subtle dimming of light. At first, they may simply become slightly less enthusiastic or a bit more distracted. You brush it off, thinking everyone has ups and downs. Then, the small criticisms begin. They may tease you about something they once praised. They may become impatient with qualities they initially claimed to love. You find yourself wondering why their tone sounds different, why the warmth you relied on seems to have cooled. You question yourself, believing you must have done something to change their behavior. This self-blame is exactly what keeps the cycle alive. During devaluation, their words become sharper, their patience thinner, their interest more conditional. They may withdraw affection without explanation, leaving you emotionally starving for the version of them you once knew. They may compare you to others, highlight your flaws, or dismiss your feelings entirely. Each moment of dismissal feels jarring because it contrasts so sharply with the earlier idealization. You start chasing the warmth of the beginning, hoping you can somehow earn it back. This longing creates a psychological loop similar to addiction. The high of being idealized was so powerful that you become willing to endure the lows in hope of returning to that initial emotional intensity. The narcissist knows, consciously or not, that this dynamic gives them control. When they sense you pulling away or expressing dissatisfaction, They may offer brief moments of re-idealization. Suddenly, they're affectionate again, apologetic even, reminding you of how magical things once felt. This intermittent reinforcement keeps you hooked because the inconsistency confuses your emotional system. You learn that love in this relationship is not steady or predictable. It must be earned through patience, endurance, or self-sacrifice. These temporary returns to idealization make you believe change is possible, convincing you to stay even as the devaluation steadily deepens. As the cycle continues, the devaluation becomes more pronounced. What began as subtle criticism evolves into overt disdain, emotional distance, or passive-aggressive hostility. You may feel like you're constantly being tested and always failing. You might try harder, being more attentive, more agreeable, more accommodating, hoping that if you adjust enough, they'll treat you the way they once did. But no amount of effort ever restores the original idealization permanently. That version of them was constructed, not real. It existed to pull you in, not to sustain a healthy connection. The more you try to reclaim it, the more you lose yourself. This cycle creates a profound emotional instability. You may feel as though you're living in two parallel relationships, one where you are cherished and one where you are criticized, and you never know which version of the narcissist you will encounter. This unpredictability leads to heightened anxiety, hypervigilance, and a constant need to monitor their mood, tone, and reactions. You become attuned to every subtle shift in their behavior, scanning for signs of impending withdrawal or conflict. This emotional labor drains your energy, leaving you depleted and increasingly dependent on them for emotional cues. As the devaluation stage becomes prolonged, the narcissist might also begin to use your need for validation against you. They may withhold affection intentionally, knowing you will bend yourself further to win it back. They may offer attention selectively, reinforcing the idea that approval must be earned. They may accuse you of being demanding or needy for wanting the same emotional closeness they once offered freely. These accusations deepen your self-doubt and make you question whether your expectations of love are unreasonable, even though what you desire is basic emotional respect. What keeps you trapped in this cycle is the memory of how they made you feel in the beginning. Even when the relationship becomes painful, that memory acts like an emotional anchor, pulling you back whenever you consider leaving. You cling to the hope that the idealization will return fully, that you can fix things, that the person you first met still exists beneath the turmoil. But the painful truth is that the initial idealization was a performance designed to fulfill their needs, not a sustainable representation of who they truly are. Isolation and dependency develop gradually in a relationship with a narcissist, often beginning with what appears to be affection, protectiveness, or deep emotional connection. At first, the narcissist may seem intensely invested in spending time with you, wanting to be your closest confidant, your primary source of comfort, even your entire world. They may say things like they've never connected with anyone the way they connect with you, or that they trust you more than anyone else. These sentiments feel flattering and intimate, but underneath them lies a slow process of separating you from the people, activities, and environments that keep you grounded. It doesn't start with commands or obvious restrictions. It often begins with gentle criticisms of your friends, subtle suggestions that certain people don't truly care about you, or mild irritation when you choose to spend time with others. You may brush these comments off as jealousy or insecurity, not realizing they are part of a larger pattern designed to narrow your world. Over time, the narcissist's disapproval becomes more pronounced. They might question your relationships, hinting that your friends are a bad influence or that your family doesn't appreciate you. They may ask why you spend time with people who don't treat you as well as they do, positioning themselves as the only person who truly understands or values you. This repeated messaging plants seeds of doubt about the intentions of those around you. You start second, guessing your support system and relying more heavily on the narcissist's perspective. because their emotional intensity feels more compelling than the quieter, steadier connections you previously relied on. In many cases, the isolation is emotional before it becomes physical. The narcissist may create conflicts or tension every time you attempt to spend time with others, making the experience so stressful that you eventually avoid those interactions to maintain peace. They might sulk when you go out, start an argument right before you leave, or make you feel guilty for prioritizing anyone but them. These reactions teach you that maintaining outside relationships comes with a cost, and to prevent drama or emotional exhaustion, you begin withdrawing. Friends notice the distance and may step back, not knowing how to help. Family members may try to intervene, but their concern is reframed by the narcissist as interference, judgment, or negativity. Slowly, the world beyond the relationship becomes less accessible. As the isolation deepens, dependency begins to take root. Because your social world has shrunk, the narcissist becomes your primary source of emotional connection. You turn to them for comfort, validation, and reassurance, even though they are often the source of the distress that creates the need for comfort in the first place. This creates a cycle where the person who destabilizes your emotions is also the one you reach for to steady yourself. Your sense of self-worth becomes tied to their approval, and your daily emotions become intertwined with their moods. If they're happy, you feel relieved. If they're distant or irritable, you feel anxious. The unpredictability of their behavior keeps you constantly attuned to their needs, shifting your focus away from your own well-being and self-understanding. Dependency also grows because the narcissist undermines your confidence in your own abilities. They may subtly criticize your decisions, question your competence, or make you feel incapable of managing things on your own. Over time, you start believing you need their guidance or input, even on matters you previously handled with certainty. This dependence is reinforced whenever they compare you unfavorably to others, implying that without them, you would struggle or fail. Their approval becomes the measure of your competence, and because their approval is inconsistent, you work even harder to earn it. Your independence erodes not only socially but mentally and emotionally. Financial or practical dependency can develop as well. A narcissist might encourage you to rely on them for certain needs, making it increasingly difficult to envision life without their involvement. They may insist on managing your resources, influencing your work decisions, or discouraging pursuits that could strengthen your independence. On the surface, this might look like help or support, but it's often a way to keep you tethered to them. The more they intervene in your daily life, the stronger the illusion becomes that you cannot function without them. Eventually, you may find yourself isolated from the people who once supported you and dependent on someone who alternates between affection and cruelty. This emotional trap creates a sense of entrapment where leaving feels impossible because you no longer trust your instincts or abilities. You may fear being alone, fear judgment from others, or fear that no one will understand what you've endured. This dependency is not a reflection of weakness, but a predictable outcome of sustained manipulation designed to make you feel that the narcissist is the only stable point in your life, even though they are the one who destabilized everything else. The long-term psychological impact of loving a narcissist is often profound because the relationship reshapes your inner world long after it has ended. When you finally step away, or when the relationship collapses under its own weight, you don't simply return to who you were before. You carry with you the echoes of all the confusion, self-doubt, emotional turmoil, and subtle conditioning that became part of your daily experience. Those echoes can follow you into new relationships, into moments of vulnerability, and into the quiet spaces where you once felt secure. The damage isn't always visible, but it becomes woven into the way you think, react, and understand yourself. One of the most significant long-term effects is the lingering sense of self-doubt. After months or years of having your perceptions questioned, your emotions dismissed, and your reality distorted, it becomes difficult to trust your own judgment. Even in situations where you logically know you're seeing things clearly, there may be a reflexive hesitation, a fear that you're misinterpreting something or overreacting. This internal uncertainty can follow you into new relationships, making you prone to second guessing yourself or seeking excessive reassurance. The voice of the narcissist, the one that constantly questioned your validity, becomes internalized, resurfacing in moments when you should be relying on your own instincts. Another lasting impact is hypervigilance. Narcissistic relationships are unpredictable, marked by sudden shifts in mood, affection, or tone. Your nervous system learns to stay on high alert, constantly scanning for signs of conflict, disappointment, or emotional withdrawal. Even when the relationship is over, your body may still respond as though danger could appear at any moment. You may find yourself overly sensitive to changes in someone's voice, facial expression, or texting habits. This heightened awareness, once a survival mechanism, becomes an exhausting filter through which you experience the world. It can make new relationships feel draining, even when the other person is kind and stable, because your mind keeps preparing for turbulence that never comes. Trust issues are another long-term consequence. Loving a narcissist often involves betrayal, not always in the form of infidelity, but in the form of emotional abandonment, manipulation, and broken promises. You learn that someone can claim to love you while simultaneously harming you, creating a painful association between closeness and danger. After the relationship ends, you may struggle to trust your own capacity to choose healthy partners. You may fear being deceived again, or worry that you'll miss the red flags you overlooked before. This fear can lead to emotional guardedness, difficulty opening up, or even avoidance of intimacy altogether. The heart becomes wary, not because it doesn't want to love, but because it remembers the cost of loving the wrong person. Another deep psychological impact is the disruption of your self-worth. Narcissists often chip away at your confidence through constant criticism, comparison, and emotional inconsistency. Over time, these messages settle into your sense of identity. Even after leaving, you may feel inadequate, unlovable, or flawed. You might approach new opportunities with hesitation, believing that your abilities are limited or that failure is inevitable. These beliefs are not reflections of your true worth, but remnants of the emotional conditioning you endured. Healing them requires time, reflection, and often the support of therapy or trusted relationships that help you rebuild the sense of self that was eroded. The emotional residue of the narcissistic relationship can also affect how you express and regulate your feelings. Because your emotions were often met with dismissal or criticism, you may become hesitant to share your feelings openly. You might apologize for expressing hurt, downplay your needs, or remain silent even when something truly matters. This emotional suppression can lead to internalized stress, anxiety, or depression. Your emotional world, once open and expressive, becomes guarded and cautious because vulnerability has been repeatedly punished in the past. Some people also experience grief that lingers long after the relationship ends. This grief isn't just for the relationship itself, but for the person they became, the time they lost, and the version of love they wanted but never received. It's a complicated grief, mixed with frustration, sadness, longing, and sometimes shame. You may grieve the hope that kept you holding on, the moments of affection that felt real, even if they were conditional, and the imagined future you once believed in. This grief can take time to unravel because it's tied to both what you endured and what you wished had been true. Despite all of this, another long-term impact is the gradual rebuilding of resilience. Survivors of narcissistic relationships often develop a deeper understanding of their emotional needs, boundaries, and patterns, but reaching that point requires moving through the psychological debris left behind. The impact doesn't fade quickly because the relationship didn't just break your heart, it altered your inner reality. Understanding this long-term effect is part of reclaiming your power, not as a final resolution, but as a recognition of the complexity of what you've lived through. The journey back to self after loving a narcissist is a slow, delicate process that asks you to rediscover the parts of yourself that were silenced, reshaped, or forgotten. It begins with recognizing the subtle ways your identity was altered. There's often a moment when you realize how far you've drifted from the person you used to be. Maybe you hear your own voice and it sounds hesitant where it was once confident. Maybe you catch yourself asking for permission to feel a certain way. Maybe you step into a space you once loved and feel like a visitor. The first part of healing is acknowledging these shifts without shame, understanding that they happen not because you were weak, but because the relationship conditioned you to survive by shrinking. Rebuilding your sense of self requires relearning how to trust your instincts. After months or years of gaslighting and emotional manipulation, your intuition may feel unreliable. You might question your emotions or doubt your decisions, even small ones. Healing begins when you start listening again to those quiet internal signals you once ignored. You pay attention to the discomfort you used to dismiss, the excitement you used to downplay, the inner warnings you once softened to avoid conflict. This reconnection to intuition is gradual. It often involves trial and error, moments of uncertainty, and a willingness to let your own perspective matter again. Setting boundaries becomes an essential part of this process. Boundaries may feel unfamiliar or even frightening because in the relationship with the narcissist, your boundaries were either violated or dismissed to the point where they seemed pointless. Healing means learning that boundaries are not walls to keep people out, but gentle lines that protect your peace. At first, boundaries may feel uncomfortable, especially if you're used to giving more than you receive. You might fear disappointing others or being misunderstood, but each time you say no when something doesn't align with your values, you reclaim a small piece of yourself. With each boundary you hold, your sense of autonomy strengthens. A significant part of the journey back to self involves reconnecting with the things that once brought you joy. During the narcissistic relationship, these passions often faded because they weren't valued or because you didn't have the emotional space to nurture them. Returning to them can be grounding. It might mean revisiting a forgotten hobby, spending time in nature, exploring creativity, or simply rediscovering silence without fear. These moments act like stepping stones, reminding you of who you were before your identity became entangled with someone else's needs. Even if you feel detached or numb at first, these activities help rebuild the emotional pathways that lead back to authenticity. Healing also requires reestablishing connections with supportive people. Narcissistic relationships often isolate you, either physically or emotionally, making you feel dependent and alone. Reaching out again can feel vulnerable, but connection is vital. Trusted friends and family can remind you of your strengths, reflect your worth back to you, and offer perspectives unaffected by manipulation. If some relationships were strained because of the narcissist's influence, rebuilding them may take time and patience. New relationships may require courage because opening up after emotional harm feels risky. Every time you create space for healthy connection, you reinforce the belief that not all intimacy is dangerous. Another part of the journey is learning how to experience emotions without fear. In the relationship, your feelings were often minimized or weaponized, making you wary of expressing them. Healing means allowing yourself to feel again without self-judgment. You learn to sit with sadness instead of apologizing for it, to acknowledge anger without seeing it as a flaw, to embrace joy without worrying it will be taken away. Emotional expression becomes a form of reclaiming your humanity after it was narrowed to fit someone else's comfort. Self-forgiveness is another quiet but powerful step. Many survivors carry guilt for staying too long, for missing red flags, or for losing themselves. But self-forgiveness recognizes that you acted from hope, love, and emotional survival. It acknowledges that you did the best you could with the perspective you had. This compassion toward yourself softens the internal harshness left behind by years of criticism and self-doubt. As you move forward, you begin to rebuild a sense of inner stability. You learn that peace isn't something someone else grants you, it's something you cultivate from the inside. You learn that your worth isn't measured by how well you cater to another person's needs. You learn that your voice matters, your boundaries matter, your dreams matter, your feelings matter, and slowly, sometimes imperceptibly, the fragments of yourself begin to gather again, forming a version of you that isn't defined by the pain you endured, but by the strength that carried you through it. In the end, the hidden trauma of loving a narcissist is not just about the harm they caused, but about the journey you were forced to take through confusion, self-doubt, emotional manipulation, and the quiet unraveling of your identity. Yet standing on the other side of that experience is proof of something far greater, your resilience. You survived a love that tried to rewrite your truth, and in doing so, you discovered a strength you didn't know you had. Healing may be slow, and the echoes of what you endured may linger, but they no longer define you. What defines you now is your ability to rise, to reclaim your voice, and to rebuild a life rooted in self, respect, clarity, and peace. The journey back to yourself is not just recovery, it is a return to the person you were always meant to be, whole, aware, and unshakably free.